Hello and welcome, everybody. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the University of Chicago Harris School of Public Policy. Today, we are joined by Professor Ryan Kellogg, who is the Ralph and Mary Otis Isham Professor, Deputy Dean for Academic Programs, and most relevant for today, he is the Faculty Director for Harris's brand new Master of Science in Climate and Energy Policy. He's going to be sharing some details about the degree and why Harris is launching this degree at this time and help answer a lot of questions that are on your mind as we are, as you are thinking about applying to graduate school. And then I will take some time at the end to talk about the application process and key dates. We would love to know more about who all of you are. So please, if you can put into the chat some words of introduction, who you are, where you're joining from, if you're in school or working, if you have a specific area of policy or climate that you're interested in, would just love to know a bit more about you. If you have questions during the presentation, please put them in the chat. We have a large group from the Harris School here that will help answer those questions in the chat as we are going in real time. And then Professor Kellogg will also take some time to answer those questions live as well. So without further ado, Professor Kellogg, we are thrilled that you're joining us today. We are so excited to be launching this new degree and excited to hear from you about some of your research in this area and why Harris is launching this.
Thank you, Devin. Thanks everybody for coming to join us. We're excited that we're here. We're excited that we're launching this degree. I'm excited to be launching this degree personally as someone who's been working in the energy and climate space, both on research and instruction for many years. So what I thought I would do, and not take too much time because I'm really interested in sort of helping answer folks' questions. But I thought I'd say a little bit about how we at the Harris School, at the University of Chicago, and at the Institute for Climate and Sustainable Growth think about the broader climate and energy problem, because that's really shaped how we think about launching this degree and what the degree is designed to do. And a lot of that really comes down to the fact comes down to why this is a degree in climate and energy policy as opposed to a degree that's, say, just climate policy. And the answer really comes down to the notion that sort of many of us here think, and this is sort of permeates the entire Institute for Climate and Sustainable Growth, that if you want to solve the climate problem, it is just absolutely essential to really grapple with the fact that energy is a critical input to almost everything we do in society. And at the end of the day, material well-being just goes hand in hand with consumption of energy. So when we think about the climate problem, what we are really thinking about is this joint climate and energy problem. And the degree is designed to grapple with exactly that. So just to illustrate on this slide here, what I'm showing is a scatter plot. Each point on this plot is a country. How does their log energy consumption per capita compare to their GDP per capita? And sort of there's the obvious upward sloping line here. The fit on this line is kind of remarkably good. But you can sort of see sort of India in the middle. The United States is way on the top right, as a relatively high income country. And you can imagine stories underlying this chart where sort of like the causal arrow goes in both directions. Think about air conditioning, for instance. As people get richer, they don't want to sit around in the heat and humidity anymore. You get grumpy, it sucks, it's uncomfortable. If I'm rich enough to buy an air conditioner, I'm going to want to buy one because that's the technology that makes me feel better when I'm sitting in the heat. At the same time, air conditioning is now known, and there's a lot of evidence behind this, to be a booster for productivity, whether that's in a manufacturing setting. If you put air conditioning, HVAC into a big manufacturing plant, the workers become more productive. The machines become more productive. Consuming energy is driving GDP. And increasingly, if you think about technologies like, say, data centers, if you want to run a modern data center, HVAC is a critical input, and there are data centers out there where something like 25 or maybe even up to a third of their energy consumption goes to air conditioning. So these inputs are just incredibly important. And because of that, historically, before we started worrying about climate, say rewind the clock 40 years, What was energy policy all about? It was really all about two things. We wanted energy to be affordable and we wanted it to be reliable. We want to know that when we go to the light switch to turn on the lights in a room and flip the switch, 99.999% of the time, the lights actually turn on. And for those of us who are in wealthy countries, that's how it works, and we take it for granted, and it's great. But that's not how it is in large parts of the world. So this is a graph just showing per capita electricity consumption, US on the left, and then all the way to the state of Bihar in India on the right. If you're not familiar with Bihar, it's a relatively low income state in India. And the fact of the matter is, if you go to Bihar and look around, what you're going to find is people there just use incredibly little electricity on average, enough electricity to power a couple light bulbs for a few hours a day. And that's just a combination of not having high incomes and having just a really unreliable electricity supply. Um, but incomes there are growing. People are there are going to want to consume more energy. And if you look at any sensible energy project, a sort of growth projection for the globe, what you're going to see is that almost all the expected global demand and energy use is coming from emerging economies, much less so the already developed OECD economies. So the energy big piece of the energy challenge is then that there's this large slice of the world where people are getting richer, they're going to want to consume more energy, and the question is, how are they going to do it? And the big issue when we start thinking about climate is that fossil fuels are sitting out there as sort of a very naturally appealing way for a growing developing economy to try to satisfy their energy needs. Think about oil, for instance. We could talk about coal, oil, or natural gas, but think about oil just to make this concrete. Like, why do people use so much oil? People use oil because it's relatively low cost, it's abundant, it's energy dense, and it's easy to move around. Think about going to a gas station to fill up your car. You can pull up to a gas station, and for something like, I don't know, 5 minutes of your time, $50 to $100, depending on your car, you can put enough energy into your car to then drive 400 miles or so, 400 miles or so. Like, we take that for granted because we're used to it, at least in the US and other rich countries. But that's, in some sense, like that's an amazing amount of energy to be able to put into your car and drive around with. And this is sort of what's appealing about fossil fuels. EVs are trying to get there. I recently bought one. I love it. It's fantastic. But that technology hasn't quite gotten to that point of sort of rapid ease of use. And that's really where things need to go. And the other thing that's going to push against this is just the overwhelming abundance of fossil fuels. This is a chart here just plotting the reserves to production ratio for crude oil in the world, basically at our current production rates, how much more oil reserves, how many more years of oil reserves do we have? And the fact of the matter is we keep discovering more and more oil sitting around in places in the earth. The US shale oil revolution is probably the biggest example of this that's happened in the past 20 years. Um, so what this means is that like fossil fuels are going to be there as a very appealing energy source for countries that are trying to grow their economies. The big problem with this, of course, is that while fossil fuels are really good on the affordability and abundance and reliability boxes, they're kind of terrible when it comes to environment and when it comes to climate change. And we've learned through a lot of work over the past few decades, and especially the past few years, through work, including work here at the University of Chicago, that the potential consequences of climate change can be quite serious. So what I am showing here on this graph is an illustration of US mortality as a function of daily average temperature. So imagine sort of thinking about really hot temperatures on the right side of this graph, 85 to 90 degrees. These are Fahrenheit. And then on the vertical axis you can think of it as daily mortality. And what you see on this graph is that mortality is higher when it's really hot out. Hot weather is bad for you. Now on this graph, the way I've made the graph, it doesn't look like that bump in mortality is all that big. And you might be wondering, like, why did I scale the axis the way it is? I could rescale this thing and make it bigger. The reason I made this graph the way it is because now I can put on this graph the same curve, but done for India. And that's what that picture is. Bottom line, really hot weather is much more deadly for you if you're in a country like India than if you're in the US. And you don't have to think too hard to think through why that's probably the case. People in India don't have air conditioning the way we do in the US. The healthcare system isn't as solid. All of these kinds of things. And it's evidence like this, and these charts are the product of thousands, tens of thousands of hours of work by the Climate Impact Lab and researchers here at the University of Chicago. But it's like sort of evidence like this that sort of like really focuses my mind, at least, on like, why do we care about climate change? At least I care because of these really adverse consequences for human welfare, particularly in parts of the world that are vulnerable. So India, Pakistan, parts of sub-Saharan Africa, and so on and so forth, where these are countries that are already too hot in some sense, and they're low income and they don't have quite the same ability to protect themselves as we do here in the United States. What does this mean? It means we don't just want two things from energy policy. Now we want three things. And this is where the energy and climate policy comes to the fore. We still want energy to be reliable and affordable. That hasn't gone away, particularly for emerging economies. But now we also want our use of energy and the production of energy to not damage the climate and not damage the local environment. Doing all three of those things at once, that's the energy and climate challenge. And that's the really hard piece of this. It's an incredibly hard problem. The world needs people that are equipped to solve it. And that's where we think this new degree, the MS in Climate and Energy Policy, MSCEP, can really contribute. Part of the way we design the degree with that in mind is that we've put analytical rigor front and center. Whether you want to do work on climate impacts and helping people adapt to a changing climate, or you want to work in energy supply, or you want to work on sort of the energy consumption side and think through how consumers of energy make decisions about what type of energy to consume. It's impossible to do those kinds of roles, or at least I think it's impossible to do those kinds of roles without being able to think clearly about data and evidence. So if you think about the chart I showed you just on the last slide of like what's the relationship between temperature and mortality? There's a ton of work that goes into both creating that plot and then being able to think critically about what is that plot telling me and what is that plot now telling me. So like this ability to be analytical, it's extremely useful, and that's true whether you want to be someone who aspires to be very hands-on with data and working with data and doing programming and creating statistics and all those things. It also applies if you want to be someone who's going to be a critical consumer of evidence. That is, even if you think you're not going to spend your career being the person sitting behind the computer writing code, you will spend your life being a critical consumer of evidence and research papers and policy papers as inputs to a decision you need to make or a decision that you are going to advise somebody to make. So that analytical focus is really critical to the degree, and we're pairing that with the idea that we want to give students broad exposure to all of the important facets of the climate and energy problem, ranging from climate science to energy technology to how do energy markets and regulation and policy work. So let me say just a little bit more on the structure of the degree itself, with sort of that motivation as background now. We've developed a suite of core classes that cover really four domains. One is going to be the data and analytical tools. This is going to be like learning to produce statistics, learning how to understand evidence, what's correlation, what's causation, one or those two concepts important, all of those types of things. And that emphasis really starts from the very beginning with the summer module. The first two classes you're going to take are going to be about data analytics, programming, and being able to handle data, and in particular, sort of data in energy, environmental, and climate domains in an intelligent way. Second pillar is economics and policy analysis. A big important piece of this for me is really understanding how do different market and policy and regulatory institutions provide incentives for energy producers to produce and install different types of energy, ranging from very free liberalized markets like the Texas electricity market Contrast that with how does a regulated utility work? Contrast that with, say, government industrial policy or sort of actually government-owned resources, and think through what different types of outcomes you're going to get from those very, very different types of systems. Climate science is obviously a critical piece of this. It's like if you're going to be intelligent in the climate and energy space, you need to know something about how the global climate works and sort of how the radiative balance of the Earth works. So that's going to lead you to be able to think intelligently about, say, climate impacts. And then finally, there's going to be an important module about energy and climate technology. How do fossil fuel generators work? What are the economics, or what are the technology driving wind and solar, battery technologies and storage, all the way to sort of more climate engineering types of technologies like carbon removal and even more exotic things like stratospheric aerosol injection, so that you have a broad picture of the whole suite of technologies that are out there and what are the key similarities and differences between them. So we have this core curriculum, and that's going to be buttressed by one, experiential learning, and then two, a suite of electives. On the experiential learning side, we really have two pillars of this. One is an experiential module that takes place in September between the summer and the fall quarters. The idea here is to send students out for 2 weeks or so, out to actually see in the real world, how are people producing energy, how are people consuming energy. And our sort of plans for this is to give students basically options from a menu of different contexts. So for example, if you're interested in going to, say, India to try and really understand, like, how do people in a world where the electricity system isn't reliable, how do people grapple with that, both as a household and as a firm trying to produce something? Go see that. Go to West Texas, see the front lines of the shale revolution, see the front lines of basically the state that's installing more solar panels than pretty much anybody else, and the second in battery storage to California, at least in the United States. Or go to New York and see how ruthless capital allocators decide what are the projects that are going to get funded and they're going to get financed, and what are the projects that are not. That's the experiential module. And then there's going to be a capstone project in the last quarter, the spring quarter, where the idea is that you're going to work with the team on an actual project where you're going to actually, integrate what you've learned through the rest of the degree and deliver and produce an actual polished deliverable. And then finally, the last piece of this is electives. We know students are coming from a lot of different interests and backgrounds. Some of you really are going to and some students might really be interested in teching up and going beyond the core data science and statistics and doing more on machine learning and more advanced programming and spatial skills. You're going to be able to take courses that do that. If you want to move towards more of a leadership management track, there are courses that are going to let you do that, like how to become a better negotiator, for instance. Or if you really want to drill down in a particular energy and climate policy area, whether it's sort of ESG and investing, the human behavior and energy consumption, the nuts and bolts of utility regulation, there are courses available that will let you go ahead and do that. Because we know that many of you have different backgrounds, so we want to sort of keep these elective options there. If I'm a professor, I like teaching. I think we have this amazing curriculum. If I had my brothers, this wouldn't be an 11-month degree. This would be like a 15 or 18-month degree. But we know it's really important for you that your time is valuable. And we've really tried to put all this together and really focus on the key important pieces in a single 1-year degree, so that you can come, learn what you need to learn, become capable producers of solutions to the climate and energy problem, and then go out into the world all within the space of a year. What are we looking for? Basically, we're interested in highly motivated people who are willing to handle and deal with and think hard about critical analytic issues in this space. You do not have to be a programmer. You don't have to have programming experience. You don't even necessarily have to have experience in the climate and energy space. If you're working somewhere outside of energy and climate and are looking for an opportunity to pivot into this space, the degree is built for that. If you're already in climate and energy policy and are looking to deepen your skill set, whether that's in markets, the underlying science, data and statistics, the degree is more than capable of doing that as well. The main thing we're looking for is a willingness and a facility with working with data and working with numbers on the way in. And that can come from your undergrad experience as an undergraduate. It can come from the work experience you've had since you graduated from college. But really, it's sort of this combination of, one, ambition and willing to contribute to this, what I think of as a critical problem facing the global society. And two, a willingness and ability to really grapple with data, evidence, and critical thinking. Those are things we've always emphasized at the Harris School in all policy domains, not just climate. And that's going to be front and center in this degree. And then our ambition is that this degree is going to help prepare the students for careers in a broad variety of domains in this space. It's a policy degree, so naturally government and regulation are going to be, natural landing spots for people, but we certainly have, aspirations, and this has been true of a lot of our MPP students over the years, of sort of having students go on to really exciting careers in the private sector and in the nonprofit sector as well. And that can be on the energy production side, it can be on the energy consumption side, global finance, you name it. There's a lot of places where we think students coming out of the University of Chicago, the Harris School, and the Institute for Climate and Sustainable Growth can go on to be leaders. So I've said a lot. I will wrap up at this point just by circling back to why are we here? Why this degree, and why, and sort of what's motivating us? Again, it really goes back to this central problem that people need energy. It's important to our existence. It's important to our productivity. We also need that energy to not damage the climate and not damage the environment. Society's made, I think, actually a lot of progress on that front over the past 10, 20 years or so. Obviously, we have a long way to go. And our hope is that this degree can be a tool by which, the University of Chicago can contribute by sort of bringing in and training sort of really ambitious, exciting students to go out in the world and contribute to this problem. So I look forward to hearing your thoughts and questions.
Thank you so much, Professor Kellogg, and thank you to all of you who have joined us today. What an absolute delight to be reading in the chat kind of where all of you are coming from. It sounds like so many of you are already very much embedded in this work, everywhere from tech startups to national parks, and even those of you who shared kind of how your and your family's lives are being impacted by climate change and your motivation to work in this field or pivot into it. It was really inspiring. I don't see any questions in the chat yet, so I'm going to go ahead and pivot to talk about the application details and the application process. While I'm doing that, if you have questions either for Professor Kellogg about the degree, about energy and environmental policy, about Harris, please put it in the chat. And then, of course, if you have questions about the application process, you can do that as well. So, hopefully many of you are inspired by Professor Kellogg's presentation and are feeling ready to go ahead and start or move forward in your application. If you have not started your application yet, I always recommend you go ahead and start your application for Harris, because it'll just get you pulled into a better stream of communications with us. You'll get assigned to a staff member on the admissions team who will be your point person to help you along the way. You'll get invited to more events and more programming. We'll know more about you. So if we're doing something in your region, we can make sure we invite you to it. So if you haven't started your application yet, that's a great next step after today. And if you've already started it and have some questions, hopefully today's presentation will help you think through that. So our application, we try to be as streamlined as possible. This is kind of general information for all of our master's applications. Our MPP and MA will have a motivation statement. For MSCEP, it's a few short essays, and we'll talk more about those to get really targeted in on sort of what it is about climate and energy policy that's of interest for you for the committee to review. Can upload your resume. There is no limit on that. The committee really wants to see your education and your professional kind of path and journey, and you can use your resume to tell that story. 3 letters of recommendation, that can be any mix of academic and or professional letters. Really find people that can speak in detail about your ability to be successful in a program like this. Upload your transcripts at the time of application. Those would be unofficial. Once you're enrolling, you would need to send along your official transcripts. And then I'll talk more about both the GRE and the TOEFL and the IELTS requirements for our applications. So these are the MSCEP short answer questions. And Professor Kellogg, I think you think you're done, but I'm going to put you back on the spot here. As we were working on developing the MSCEP application together, we kind of looked at a few different options for this, and these were ultimately the questions that Professor Kellogg and the faculty committee landed on for our applicants. Could you talk a bit about, what you're hoping to learn from an applicant, in their answering of these questions?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's a couple things. One, and like this is sort of like really what we're getting at questions one, two, and to some extent three. Like what motivates you to want to be here and take this degree? Like what is it that sort of brought you into the energy and climate space, whether it's something that's happened in the past, something that has to do with your working experience, your own lived experience. Um, whatever that may be, courses you took as an undergraduate, like why are you passionate about contributing to this problem? And where do you see yourself being, say, 5 years from now, post-Harris, contributing to the world? It's like we're looking to bring in just like sort of an amazing mix of different perspectives from all around the world, from all kinds of different backgrounds. Because like part of what our goal is with this degree, we're going to do a lot of, teaching and training here, but I think a lot of the value from the degree is actually going to come from just a lot of within student cohort learning and sort of sharing of different experiences. Part of what excites me about about being the director of the degree and teaching in it, I plan on teaching the energy and environmental markets course, is actually just learning from students based on their own experiences. Like to me, that's always been the best part of teaching, and especially teaching in a professional setting where students often come in having already done really interesting things. So that's going to be a piece of what we're going to be looking for from the applications. And then the second piece, and this is sort of really question 4 on this list on this slide, is like demonstration that you're really ready to grapple with hard analytic questions. And like I said, like you shouldn't be scared of that question. That doesn't mean you need to be a rock star Python programmer before you come in. You actually don't need any Python experience. You don't need to have a math degree or something like that. But you need to have some demonstrated sort of willingness and aptitude to, get dirty with data, work hard to understand the problem, separate fact from fiction, learn what you can from evidence, and learn how to be able to sort of synthesize evidence, combine evidence and facts with values in order to arrive at policy recommendations, or at least sort of, a good analysis that tells us what are the trade-offs of different types of policy designs.
Great. Thanks so much, Professor Kellogg. Another important element of the application is the GRE or the GRE waiver. So like many of our peers during those COVID years, we had to go GRE optional due to the lack of access to the test. Before that, the GRE was required for all of our full-time master's programs. A few years ago, the faculty voted to bring the GRE back as a requirement, but sort of added this element of students could qualify for a waiver if they meet certain criteria. And those criteria are 5 or more years of relevant post-bachelor's professional experience or military experience, coursework of earning a B or better, or the equivalent of that if that's not your grading scale, in a credit-bearing Calculus 1 or beyond math level course, or those who have graduated, completed their undergraduate degree at the University of Chicago. My team will often tell students, though, think about your whole application, right? And what kind of information you're conveying to the committee. You've heard Professor Kellogg several times in today's presentation talk about the quantitative nature of this degree. So as you're thinking about your academic background, your professional background, think about the GRE, whether you take it or not, even if you qualify for the waiver, as a tool to convey that, right? So if you have a very quantitative background, both professionally, academically, strong GPA, perhaps the GRE does not give the committee any additional information. But if your background was in the humanities, you did not take a lot of quantitative courses. You've been in a leadership role at work, but it also has not been particularly quantitative. In that case, the GRE can be an incredibly helpful data point, right, for the committee. So think about your background and think about the GRE as a tool to communicate your quantitative ability to the committee. The TOEFL and IELTS, this is the university's English language requirement, and this is set by our kind of central office at UChicago Grad. So just communicating here what that minimum criteria is and the waiver criteria. So students can attest that English was their primary language of communication and schooling since childhood. In that case, you would not be required to submit a language test. Or if you did at least an academic year in the last 10 years in an English-speaking institution, and there's a list of countries that are approved for this, you also would not be required. If that does not describe you, if you would not be able to attest to either of those waivers, you would be required to submit either the TOEFL or the IELTS and meet the minimum scores in order to be considered for admission. Just want to give an overview to give you a sense of the tuition for this program. These are based on the 25-26 current tuition rates. The 26-27, so when the students in this program will be starting, tuition rates will be set likely in the spring, if not sooner. But we could expect an increase above this. But want to give you a sense of the cost of the degree, and also want to kind of message that, we consider students from merit-based scholarships. About 70% of Harris's master's students receive some sort of merit scholarship. That range can be anywhere from $5,000 to full funding. Most awards kind of are in that $15,000 to $20,000 range. So you can kind of plan for and think about a partial support for a master's degree from Harris. And the MSCEP is 4 quarters. So this would be kind of summer, fall, winter, and spring that students would be in the program. The application deadline. Those of you who have already started an application, some of you might be working your way right now to put the finishing touches on to be able to submit for the early action deadline next week. We also have 2 other deadlines on December 5th and January 15th. I want to note that since MSCEP is a summer start, I'm going to encourage you to get your application in as early as you can. For those of you who submit by October and December, you'll get your decisions well in time for the admitted student programming that will be happening in early March. And for the decision deadline on March 15th. For those of you that apply in January, that decision, you're going to have like 2 weeks basically to prepare. It's going to be a very quick turnaround for you. So if you're able to submit by that December deadline, we very much encourage you to do so. So thinking about, for admitted students, what those next steps are. Early March, we're going to do virtual admitted student programming to bring the cohort together, to help you connect with both the Institute for Climate on campus, as well as the Harris faculty who are leads for this program. This program does have a March 15th decision deadline. Most master's programs with a fall start are going to have an April 15th decision deadline. We need to be earlier for this program because of the summer start, and this is going to be particularly important for international students who will require a visa. You're going to need those 60 days to work with the Office of International Affairs to get your I-20 and apply for your visa. So really, as you're applying for this program, really be ready to move quickly. Our MSCEP students will also be included in our on-campus admitted student day programming that we will be hosting on March 26th and 27th at the Keller Center, and we do provide some travel support for students to come join us for that. MSCEP right now tentatively is planning on orientation July 6th through 10th, and then kicking off with the start of classes on July 13th. So again, be planning kind of for that early summer start with this program. So as I've been talking, I've been seeing lots coming through the chat. So I would like to pause here and take a look at the questions that have been coming in and make sure we get as many of these questions answered for you today as well.
Yeah, and I've been looking. So maybe I'll take one while Devin you keep skipping. There was a question
Yeah.
about like for students who already have a fair amount of quantitative experience, will professors be willing and able to scale assignments in the data analytics courses so that they still provide a challenging opportunity? Great question. So a couple of thoughts there. So like if you are someone who already has a bunch of data experience and potentially coding experience, uh, those the data analytics courses, I think, are going to be designed to still add value by virtue of the fact that they are going to be explicitly targeted at how to apply those kinds of skills to the energy, climate, and environmental data sets you are likely to encounter as a practitioner in this area. So the way we're thinking about these courses, they are not sort of set up as like these are courses around learning how to code, for instance. Yeah, you're going to be doing that as part of the course, but the courses are really about how do you become a person who can sensibly work with, say, a data that tells you about climate impacts, say some of the spatial temperature data or simulation data that would come out of a climate model, for instance, or historical global temperature data that are arranged in some spatial way. How would you deal with high frequency local marginal price data that come from a wholesale electricity market where you have prices every 5 minutes from hundreds of different nodes on an electricity grid, including how much electricity is being injected and consumed into those nodes at any given point in time. Like, how do you deal with a data set like that? And the fact that data sets always come with errors and so on and so forth. How do you deal with health data in a way that would help you understand climate impacts? Some of these data are spatial, some of them are tabular. You get a bunch of different things. The program is very tied towards applying sort of smart data management, data analysis, and data organization skills to those types of data sets. All that said, if you are someone who like really has a lot of experience in that already, or so like maybe this would be true of any of our courses, we have existing waiver processes for the courses that are already part of the MPP, and we can think about how that would work. But we have designed these courses such that even if you have a really strong background in sort of one of the disciplinary areas that a course is targeting, the courses are going to be sort of tailored towards the climate and energy challenge in such a way that we think the entire cohort should be able to get value out of them.
Great. Thank you, Ryan. First question I'm seeing here, I think a takeaway for me from when you were talking about the student profile is high quant and mid-career. And of course, we have questions from people that are like, I'm really interested in this. I want to do this, but I don't think that describes me, right? Both in terms of like, how hard of a requirement is this quant background? And like, I'm graduating this year. Is this something I could still do? Could you address, kind of people who are interested in this, want to do this, but may have not heard themselves described in the kind of ideal candidate that you've described?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, on the quant side, that if you are coming from a background from say an undergraduate degree that is not necessarily known for being quant, so not stats, not computer science, not engineering, not econ, not something like that. Like the way I think to sort of demonstrate readiness for the degree on the application, there's still a bunch of avenues available to you. One, of course, is the GRE. Two, of course, is, even if the major you have itself doesn't screen quant, are there courses that you took around sort of applied statistics, applied data work, things like that, or a finance course or something along those lines? And then, of course, for those if you have work experience, were you doing sort of data analytical work in your own professional practice, whether it's working with spreadsheets, building business cases, doing investment analyses? There's lots of forms that kind of work could take. And I want to be really careful about excluding any of those types of forms of work. So I think there are a lot of avenues to demonstrate preparation on the quant side. And again, I'll just really emphasize we are looking for a broad class. And the same goes for years of work experience. You know, at the end of the day, there's going to be a mix between sort of early career, mid-career people, and almost surely some students who have very recently completed their undergraduate degree and are looking to buttress that undergraduate education or expand it into sort of a degree that's sort of a little bit more technical and analytic, or a degree that's more in the energy, climate, and environmental space than what they had.
Great. Thanks so much, Professor Kellogg. And I just want to note here, MSCEP is a new degree that we are launching. Harris's MPP is our biggest, our broadest, our most flexible degree, is a great option for students. So as you were hearing, Professor Kellogg answering this question, I would imagine some of you are thinking of like, is there a backup plan for me, right? Like I really want to apply to MSCEP, but could I be considered for another degree at Harris? And you'll see when you start your application, there's going to be a question that says, if I'm not admitted to my first choice program, consider me for my second choice. And this would be a great place to say like, yep, consider me for another program. You don't need to submit 2 applications. You just need to select that option. The MPP with the specialization in energy and environmental policy can be a wonderful option as well. That gives you just some additional flexibility. It gives you the full 2 years. So keep that in mind as well as you are working your way through the application process. And if you're thinking about kind of your own background as Professor Kellogg is describing this program. Could you talk a bit about what students can be doing now to help prepare themselves to be successful in a course like this? So, the question here is like, could you recommend, kind of coursework students could be taking, or, sometimes people will want to get a head start on a boot camp type program or some reading in the area. Is there anything you'd recommend, Professor Kellogg, that people can do to prepare themselves to be successful in this program?
Yeah, no, I think there are a bunch of really interesting options, and it kind of depends on sort of where you want to buttress yourself. There's a whole dimension of like before arriving, really trying to do more to understand this space, and both just to give yourself an understanding of like what's important in energy and climate, and also to help you think through your own personal choice of what particular area do you want to focus on in this really large domain. Like for me personally, sort of my own research and teaching and interests have sort of really tended to focus on the energy supply side. So I do a lot of my own work is really geared at understanding what motivates firms and energy producers to produce the energy that they do. But there's just a ton of different things you could be interested in, whether it's sort of climate adaptation, really driving national policy, helping consumers make better decisions about whether they should get solar panels on their roofs or what kind of heat pump they should install or what kind of car they should buy. It's just a million different things you can do. And I think the best way to get a handle on that is really just to become sort of a more avid consumer of recent energy policy research and what's happening in the energy world right now. So for example, if you go to the webpage of the University's Institute for Climate and Sustainable Growth, ICSG, what you will find there are sort of a bunch of sort of research summaries of the work that researchers, professors, graduate students, and others are doing here at the University of Chicago. And that'll give you a pretty good feel for sort of like what the frontier of the world is for understanding the most recent developments on this front. And some of that research is going to be in economics, some is going to be in policy, some of it's going to be on the engineering side. There's just a huge amount of activity that's going on campus right now. The Institute webpage also does a really nice job of linking to the various public events and policy interactions that the Institute has had. That links. The Institute has also recently started a podcast. It's called Shocked. Very clever title. Props to whoever came up with that one. That I think they're just 3 episodes in right now, but those episodes are really designed to sort of highlight intersections between the work researchers are doing here at the university and the real world problems that people care about. So there's just a lot of resources being run through the Institute now that I think will be really helpful in navigating your way through this broad space. So On that front, I think that's probably the go-to resource. And then if you're interested in sort of the quantitative side and maybe don't have a strong quant background and are looking to tech up, um, I can't think of I don't know if I have a specific resource at my fingertips at the moment. That's something we can go back and look at. But I believe there are resources out there around, in particular, I think, sort of applied sort of data analysis and just being an intelligent user of statistics. Like you shouldn't feel like you need to go take a math course or an advanced math course or go take a programming course. But sort of like doing exercises that help you think a little bit more clearly about like how to think and use data is helpful. Actually, now that as I've been talking about this and said what I just said, two of our faculty here, Ethan Bueno de Mesquita, now our dean, and Anthony Fowler came out with a really nice book a couple years ago called Thinking Clearly with Data. Literally, that's the title. It's non-technical, but it is designed to help train students and other just sort of active practitioners be intelligent consumers of evidence without getting bogged down in a lot of technical detail. That book is sort of like a really good tool for like sort of judging your own comfort level with this kind of critical, rigorous thinking.
Great, thank you. We have a question in the chat. Would love to hear more about the experiential learning, and is there financial support for the travel involved?
Yeah, so the experiential learning, we are working on developing sort of a suite of options for students who are interested that try to capture students' different interests. So the experiential learning module that lands in September after the third summer course before you go and before the regular fall quarter starts, which at Chicago happens at the very, very end of September. It's actually next week for this current academic year. Um, so, at least one of the options is going to involve international travel. Sort of the program we have in mind is sending students to India or Pakistan to like really get some hands-on experience, sort of like in terms of like how the electricity grid functions and doesn't function there, and sort of learn about sort of the challenges of energy and climate in a setting where there's, incomes in a low to middle income country that's desperately trying to grow. Um, that option is not going to make sense for everybody. There are people on this call who I think are calling in from India as we speak. You do not need that experiential learning if you're that person. So other options are going to be things like going to see what energy production looks like here in the US. In particular, like go to North Dakota, go to West Texas, see the actual front line of what the shale oil and gas boom really looks like. Talk to people who are participating in that, see how they think, see what goes on a drilling rig, see what gas gathering lines look like. If you're in West Texas, you don't have to go very far from there to basically get to where they're putting up windmills and especially solar panels like crazy right now. It's like those are the suites of experiences we have in mind. I think we're also looking pretty hard at sending students up to New York to go down to the Wall Street area and talk with investors who are making really difficult and kind of ruthless capitalist decisions every day about financing clean energy projects and fossil energy projects, like real decisions that are being made with hundreds of millions and billions of dollars on the line, and just having an opportunity to interact with them and try to get a handle of like why do some projects get financed and why do some projects just not happen?
Great.
And what does policy have to do with it?
And the cost of the experiential learning experience is included in the cost of the program. So the students wouldn't be paying kind of an additional fee for that once they've enrolled. It would be what they are. You will be sort of included in the cost that you are paying for the program. We have some questions here about, I'm seeing some questions about like, this sounds great, but like, could I do it remotely? Can I do it part-time while I continue to do my job? And I see, that the Harris team is answering questions here, and just want to ground that the MSCEP program is a full-time degree. It is probably very unlikely that you are going to be able to continue working while you are in it in any sort of meaningful way. And it is going to be those 11 months. We do have the evening master's program, which is designed for, kind of working professionals, and that is in Chicago in person. And we do have some remote online non-degree options for people who are interested in like skilling up, but not doing a full degree. but just want to kind of level set on that. Professor Kellogg, we've gotten a few questions from people, asking about MSCEP versus MPP. What's the difference about those two things? Could you talk a bit about sort of how this degree is different and what students might expect to get out of MSCEP versus what they would get out of the full MPP?
Yeah, outstanding question. So the MPP is meant to be a broad 2 year, not 1 year, education in sort of the analytic tools and concepts and ideas that are essential to be contributors across a broad set of policy domains. So the MPP does contain this substantial specialization in energy and environmental policy, but the MPP also serves students who are interested in working in education or working in healthcare or international development or conflict resolution and all of these different things. So if you come into the MPP core, the courses that take up your time in the fall and winter, you come to the MPP and you're going to take courses in data and statistics, microeconomics, and analytical politics. Those courses all give very broad backgrounds, and they're going to draw from examples across all of these different policy domains. And energy and climate issues are going to come up, but they're not going to be the focus of those core courses. And I think the big contrast between the MPP and the MSCEP in this regard is that when you take the MSCEP, like when you're learning data and statistics and like how to produce and understand evidence, it is 100% going to be full time in the context of climate, energy, and environmental challenges. Like every data set you work with as part of your training is going to be within that domain. So like if you're somebody who's, really confident that the energy, climate, environmental space is what you want to be in, the MSCEP is a really well-targeted degree for that. If you are not sure whether you want to work in health or climate or education or something else and are interested in sort of a deeper and broader and methodological training and some more opportunities to figure out what your real interest is, sort of a 2 year MPP might be a better fit for that. So like a lot of it really depends on interest and fit. And of course, the MSF is 1 year and the MPP is 2.
Great, thank you so much. We have a question that came into the chat about the capstone project. Could you talk more about the structure of it? And, is this going to look like a traditional master's thesis, or is it going to be different than that?
Yeah, so the structure of the capstone project is actually quite different from a typical course and really almost any of the other courses in the program. And I think you should also not think of it as a master's thesis. I think of a master's thesis as, you come up with your own independent project, you work on it solo, write a paper that's kind of more academically research oriented, turn it into a faculty member. So I don't want to diminish the experience. It's a worthwhile experience, but that's not what the capstone is. So the capstone it's a team project. It's built to be in a format of something that we actually already have as part of the MPP, which is our Paris Policy Labs, where sort of teams of students work together with an external client, potentially a simulation, but for the most part, external clients, on a project that needs a deliverable at the end of the day. And the idea here is that sort of by working on a real project, this is an opportunity to apply all the skills you learned in your prior training in the degree, with quantitative skills about thinking about markets, skills about all your learning about the various energy technologies and so on. And actually produce a presentation and a report at the end of the day that somebody would actually care about and read and potentially base decisions off of. So part of this is about like how do you actually synthesize everything you've learned and put that together onto something at the end of the day. And I think part of the idea of a capstone course is like this is a really important opportunity for you to also just build professional skills. Like how do you produce a polished deliverable? What do you put in a polished presentation? How do you take all the analysis you did and package it in a way that actually forms a compelling argument at the end of the day? How do you work with the team? All of that. The capstone project touches on all of that. And sort of the way we're thinking about the structure is that the formal capstone course occurs in the spring. That's where the bulk of the capstone work is going to be. There's almost surely going to be some lead up work to that over the course of the winter of, picking the project that's going to like matching students with the right projects. Because not everybody is going to work in the same project together. The cohort's not is going to be a little bit too large for that. So people are going to be broken up into smaller teams on different projects. Identify the projects, do some preliminary scoping of the works, do that in the winter so that when you hit spring, you're really ready to hit the ground running.
We had a question come in asking, is MSCEP going to prepare me for an international career, or since it is based in the U.S., is this going to mostly be focused on preparing people for jobs in the U.S.?
Yeah. Both U.S. and international jobs are going to be an important emphasis. And this is something that's just true broadly about Harris, not just the MSCEP. Our career development office has a lot of experience sort of helping support students who are looking for jobs internationally and domestically. That's just a big part of what we do as being sort of a globally minded institution. As I said at the outset, when I think about the energy and climate problem, it is not just a domestic problem, it is a global problem. So global outreach is going to be a huge part of what we do. And there's a bunch of resources to help support students on the job hunt, because we know that's a really important thing that each of you cares about, and very much rightly so. So MSCEP students are going to have full access to our career development office, CDO, and on top of that, MSCEP students are going to have access to all of the resources that the Institute for Climate and Sustainable Growth are putting together. So the Institute has already been running job fairs and information sessions, and has a lot of external contacts. That wealth of resources is going to be available to all the students in this program, and our intent is to start supporting students even before they arrive in the summer, with additional support and the beginning of the mentoring process and advice on how to put together a resume and those sorts of things. I think Crescinda Doherty, our head of CDO, is on the call. If you want to chime in with a few additional thoughts.
Yeah, Ryan, I think you actually did a really, really nice job. But just to reiterate, here at the Career Development Office at Harris, we have a team of over 10 people that work to support our students, both on the career coaching side, as well as working with employer partners, both in the US and across the globe, as the question kind of suggested. So we are so excited to meet with you and help you on this journey from, as Ryan was saying, even before orientation. So we're putting a lot of thought and emphasis into how do we ensure that you students in this very fast program, intensive program, feel ready to go even before day one. So like I said, we're just excited to meet you all.
Great. Thank you all so much. I see we're at about time. I want to, again, a huge thank you to all of you for joining today, for your interest in investing in yourself, in your career, in kind of going down further in terms of your education and your work in addressing climate and energy policy. Really want to thank Professor Kellogg for taking the time to kind of share his insights about this new degree with us. We are hosting in November a faculty masterclass with Professor Kritro Ito, who is one of our energy and environmental faculty members. I see my colleague Blake put the registration link in the chat. If you have not already registered for that, I encourage you to do so. I think it'll be a kind of a wonderful session to get a sense of the type of research faculty are doing, and also connect with a faculty member who will be teaching in this program. Thank you all. We look forward to continuing to work with you in the application process, and I hope to be welcoming some of you to the Keller Center kind of next summer. Take good care, everybody. Goodbye.